Today's scripture is in Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
Wow. Well, good morning. It's
Good morning.
good to see all of you this morning. It is my turn to give the lesson today, and as always, I hope and pray that what I have to say is scripturally truthful and maybe something that you could take along with you. I'd like to start by sharing a true story to kind of set the table. There was a man who lived in Japan by the name of, I gotta think about this, Sotomu Yamaguchi was his name. And this was during World War II. And he had the kind of job that required that you take a lot of business trips. And on one particular occasion, he took a business trip, and he found himself on August 6th of 1945 on a business trip in Hiroshima. Well, if you know history, you would know that on that day, we, the United States, dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Bad time to be on that road trip. But he survived that blast. And he had some injuries, but he was still able to go back to his hometown. And so 3 days later, he was back in his hometown of Nagasaki, Japan. Well, if you know history, you would know that 3 days after we dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, we dropped another one on Nagasaki. That's right. This poor fellow had 2 atomic bombs dropped on him. But he survived both of those blasts, and he goes down in history as a footnote as the only person known to have experienced and survived both of those bombings. Very, very unusual. It seems like this man had the worst of luck and the best of luck all at the same time. Why am I telling you this? Well, a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense are going to happen in this life. And sometimes it is difficult to apply logic or purpose as to why things happened the way that they happened. And that's true in our personal lives. Just like with Mr. Yamaguchi. Why did it happen that way? It's hard to put logic to it. We human beings, we want to have satisfactory answers as to why things happen the way they happen. And it can get especially complicated for those of us who are Christians when we incorporate God's involvement in the equation. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. I don't. But my hope today is that maybe we could step back and contemplate some things as we try to navigate through this life. When we look at many things that happen in this life, if we're not careful, we can think ourselves into confusion and disillusion very quickly, especially when bad things happen. So let's step back and let's look at a few scriptures that can help to provide some stability when our hearts are troubled with the tragedies and the sufferings and injustices that we see in this life. The first thing I want us to focus on is God is active and is in control in the affairs of mankind in this world. It is God who sets up nations and their leaders. It is God who uses the nations for his purposes, and God has the power to tear down nations as he determines. In Jeremiah chapter 18, in verse 7, starting there, God says, "The instant I speak concerning a nation, and to pluck it up, to pull down, and to destroy it, if that nation whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent on the disaster that I thought to bring upon it. And if the instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to build and plant it, if it does evil in my sight, so that it does not obey my voice, then I will relent concerning the good with which I would benefit it." In spite of what men might say, it is God who establishes and controls the fate of nations, and ultimately this principle is true with individual lives as well. We may make choices that God may or may not approve of, but nothing happens without God permitting it first. Proverbs 16 verse 9 says, "A man's heart prepares his way, but the Lord directs his steps." So the first thing I want us to consider is that God is active. His providence is in full effect and is in control of what is happening in our lives. That's why he wants us to pray to him. He is active and in control. The second principle I want us to think about is that Satan is also active in this world. Even though God is in control, Satan still has considerable power to bring tragedy into our lives. And the first two chapters of Job really show us this. We won't read that, but when you look through it, even though God is in control, he permits Satan to bring suffering into Job's life. And that can happen in our lives as well. We read in Job that twice Satan uses forces of nature to bring suffering to Job. Twice he uses the choices and actions of people, and once he uses physical disease to bring suffering. That's a lot of power under his control. But remember, it was Satan who brought the suffering, not God. It was God who put limits on Satan. When we see suffering result from forces of nature, disease, or the actions of people, let's attribute those things to Satan, not to God. We cannot dismiss Satan or his power to harm us. If you look in 1 Peter 5, verses 8 and 9, you can read that as I speak. But when you look at 1 Peter 5, verses 8 and 9, Peter describes some things about Satan that we need to be mindful of. First of all, he is against us. He is our adversary, Peter says. Secondly, he is active. He walks about, Peter says. Third, he is powerful, like a roaring lion. And fourth, he intends to destroy us, seeking whom he may devour. But Peter also says some things about us and Satan. First of all, we are to be watchful for him. We are to be sober and vigilant. Secondly, we are to resist him in the faith, rely on God's strength and not our own. And thirdly, he's going after all who are Christians. He says the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world. We're not alone in Satan going after us. God is active in this world, but so also is Satan. The third thing I want to consider when we see bad things happen is that God allows all people to have free will. God doesn't force us to do anything. Satan doesn't force us to do anything. Now, needless to say, many of the choices and actions that human beings make are not in harmony with God's will. We see all kinds of actions of people that lead to tragedy, suffering, and injustice and evil in this world. When it comes to free will, Proverbs 3 verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Now, it's worth noting that some of the bad things that result from human actions are not intended to create harm, but rather have good intentions behind it. Many well-intended free will human actions can end badly because we can't always see all of the potential possibilities that could result from our plans. So while God is in control, he permits us to have free will, and he allows the results of human free will to occur, even if it is contrary to God's will. So we've looked at how God is active and in control. We've looked at how Satan is active. And we looked at how free will actions can impact how things happen in our world. But there's one more possibility I want to look at today. And that sometimes things just happen. There may be some circumstances where the outcome is not the result of God's providence intervening in the situation. Just as the Bible speaks of God's providence intervening in world events, the Bible also speaks how sometimes things just happen. Turn, if you would, to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Ecclesiastes chapter 11. In verse 3 of that chapter, it says, "If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie." Kind of an interesting verse, isn't it? Solomon is describing typical occurrences of nature here. Sometimes it's just going to rain. And sometimes a tree is just going to fall where it's going to fall. It might fall this direction, it might fall that direction, but it just fell and there it lies. It just happened. And sometimes this is true in human events as well. Look at Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. Where it says, "I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all." Time and chance happens. Do you think that God is ordaining who's going to win the Super Bowl? If he does, I'd like to know what he has against the Vikings. Or do you think just maybe the outcome of that game will be determined by what the players are doing on the field, and that's just how it happens? Sometimes it's just time and chance when things happen. In our verse here, you would think that the fastest runner would win the race, but it doesn't always happen that way. You would think that the strongest army would win the battle, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes time and chance will bring about an outcome that may defy our logic and may not have a grand purpose behind it, but yet it just happens. Even though God is in control, sometimes things just happen. In Luke chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, Jesus references an event that happened at that time where a tower fell and killed 18 people. Now, there were some who thought this happened to them because God was punishing them. Jesus says, no. This was an unfortunate case of time and chance where these poor people just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Jesus said that it's not important why it happened, but rather you need to be right with God if it happens. That's the point. Sometimes things just happen. We need to be right with God at all times, whether it happens to us or not. When we try to find ourselves answering why things happen, we can think ourselves in circles and become more and more confused and discouraged to the point where it can negatively affect our faith. In Psalm 73, the context of that psalm, the writer of that psalm is seeing the wicked prosper around him while he is struggling, trying to live a godly life. And he's looking for answers as to why is this happening. And in Psalm 73, verses 16 and 17, he says, "When I thought to understand this, it was too painful for me until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their end." You see, when we focus on trying to understand why bad things happen, we will also become discouraged and disillusioned unless we are focused on the sanctuary that God provides. Until we focus on His sanctuary, it's going to be painful. Unless we focus on the sanctuary of God, we will not find the peace and the comfort that God offers. What is a sanctuary? Well, it is a place of safety, peace, protection, comfort, and hope. The sanctuary of God is not limited to a physical location. It can be a worship assembly, it can be fellowshipping with Christians, but ultimately, the sanctuary that God provides is an internal resolution of faith within ourselves individually. It's a matter of what we focus on our day of struggle. So when things happen, let's learn to focus on the protection and the comfort and the hope that God promises on us when our time is done on this earth. Remember, our faith in God cannot be predicated on God preventing bad things from ever happening to us. That is not what we are promised. That is not a biblical faith, and that is a faith that is destined to collapse. Rather than expecting the absence of tribulation, let's instead focus on the hope of salvation to overcome tribulation. Jesus makes it clear in John 16, verse 33. He says, "In this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." We will have tribulation, but we can overcome the world's tribulations because Jesus overcame it first. The Lord may or may not prevent tribulation in our lives, but He will be with us to help us get through it when it does happen. We will have many questions about why things happen in this world, and we want answers. But let's remember that God is actively working all things together for good to those who love God. And let us not forget that Satan is also actively looking to wreak havoc in our lives. Plus, the free will actions of people are going to muddle it up even more. And finally, sometimes things just happen and we may not have satisfactory answers. But we need to be ready if it does happen. Let's remember that ultimately God is in control, and as Seth read a few minutes ago, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. Things work together for good not through the absence of tribulation, but through the faith to overcome tribulation on our way to heaven. Part of our purpose this morning is to encourage one another to remain faithful during all times of our lives. If you have not yet been added by the Lord to those who are saved through obedience to the gospel, we are here to assist with that so that you too may learn to overcome the tribulations of this world that we may face. If you are struggling, I hope these words have been helpful to encourage us to turn to God and His sanctuary during our time of difficulty. If you have this or any needs, please make them known as we stand and sing.